Welcome to Whispers and Confessions. There might be a twist waiting, so please make sure to watch until the end. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Let's begin right away.
It had been 3 years since my wife and I moved into this apartment, and we were finally getting familiar with the neighborhood and the people around us. It was starting to feel like home. But about 6 months ago, a couple moved in next door, and they've been interesting, to say the least. Honestly, they've shaken things up a bit for us. My name is Greg, and I'm 41. My wife, Katie, is also 41. We went to high school together. We don't have any kids, so we get to enjoy our time together pretty freely. We're both pretty busy with work, so our nights together aren't as frequent as we'd like, but I love Katie. Always have. Next door, there's Mike, who's 51, and his wife, Tessa, who's 39. They've got a bit of an age gap. They moved in around 6 months ago. Since this is a rental, nobody really bothers with neighborly introductions anymore. We didn't say hello when we first moved in either. Back in the day, you'd go introduce yourself to the neighbors, but those customs have started to fade. Still, when Mike and Tessa moved in, they came over and introduced themselves very politely. Mike doesn't look his age at all. He could easily pass for his early 40s. Tessa, on the other hand, though she's younger, has this mature air about her. She's incredibly attractive, even though she looks a little older than her age. When they came over to say hi, Tessa was wearing this outfit that really showed off her figure. I hate to admit it, but from that moment, she kind of lodged herself in my mind. Katie and I both work full-time, so mornings are hectic. I usually leave for work first, and Katie, whose workday starts a little later, gathers the trash and takes it out. I try to help out sometimes, but mostly, I just leave it to her. It's kind of lazy, I know, but she's better at keeping things in order than I am. I think Tessa's a stay-at-home wife. Sometimes she's out front in an apron, saying hello, or we run into each other in the elevator when I'm leaving for work and she's taking out the trash. When I see her in the morning, I'm usually in a rush, so it's just a quick greeting, nothing more than that. We've never really had a proper conversation. Normally, Katie's home from work by dinner time, so she takes care of making dinner. But I like cooking too, so on weekends, I'll often whip something up and surprise her with a homemade meal. One day, though, Katie called to let me know that her office was going through some kind of restructuring and she'd be working late for the foreseeable future. I figured if we were both coming home late every night, things would get chaotic fast, so I decided to rearrange my schedule a bit and cut down on my own late hours, at least while she was stuck at the office. On Katie's first night of late work, I finished my job early, stopped by the grocery store, and grabbed ingredients for dinner, along with some of my favorite snacks and a 6-pack of beer. I wanted everything to be ready for when she got home. I rely on her so much that I felt like I should step up for once, especially now that she was going through a tough time at work. I got back to our building and went to unlock the door when I noticed a woman sitting on the ground by the front door, shopping bags next to her. "Are you okay?" I asked instinctively. She looked up, and to my surprise, it was Tessa, our neighbor. What was she doing sitting here? Tessa was wearing a short skirt, and from where I was standing, I could see right up it. Her loose t-shirt hung low, revealing her cleavage. I knew I shouldn't be looking, but I couldn't help it. I wanted to see more, and unfortunately, my body responded. She spoke in a slightly embarrassed tone. "Oh, it's you, the guy from next door. I've got a bit of a problem." Apparently, she'd gone shopping in a hurry and realized too late that she'd forgotten her keys inside the apartment. The front entrance had an automatic lock, so she couldn't even get into the building. She was waiting for Mike to come home, but she was exhausted from carrying all the shopping bags and had decided to sit down. "That's rough," I said. "Why don't you wait in our place until your husband gets back? I can at least offer you a cup of coffee." "Oh no, I wouldn't want to bother you," she replied, but then she hesitated. "Are you sure it's okay?" "Of course it's no problem. Neighbors help each other out, right?" I smiled and invited her in. Once inside, I made her some coffee. I still needed to prep dinner before Katie got home, so I started chopping vegetables in the kitchen while Tessa sat at the counter, sipping her drink and chatting with me. I'd always been curious about the age difference between her and Mike, so I finally asked about it. She told me that Mike had been one of her instructors at a night school she attended years ago. At the time, she'd admired him from afar, but nothing had happened between them back then. They only reconnected by chance when they ran into each other on the subway years later. Mike had always remembered her too, but had thought it would have been inappropriate for them to date while she was his student. But when they met again as adults, they felt like it was fate, and things just clicked between them. As she shared this story, Tessa came over to the kitchen and said, "Let me help you with that," standing right next to me as we finished preparing dinner together. Whether she meant to or not, she always seemed to wear clothes that showed off a bit more than usual. And tonight was no different. Everything was on display, and I couldn't help but notice. Being so close to her stirred up feelings I didn't know I had. Katie came home while we were still in the kitchen. I explained what had happened, and she was sympathetic, saying, "That sounds rough, Tessa. I hope you're okay." Mike came home shortly after, and I finally got to have a proper conversation with him. I learned that he was actually a pretty solid, thoughtful guy. Over the following weeks, Mike and I became friendly. If we knew Tessa would be home early, sometimes Mike and I would stop by a local bar for some beers and grilled chicken, deepening our neighborly bond. But with that, I also started running into Tessa more often in the mornings. At first, we would cross paths maybe once or twice a week, but soon enough, it was almost every day. I was always in a rush in the mornings, so I just said hello and didn't think much of it. But then I started noticing something. Was Tessa going out of her way to see me? She always wore these casual, revealing clothes, and I didn't know where to look. Was she trying to flirt with me? Was I imagining it? I found myself stealing glances at her body whenever we crossed paths. As silly as it sounded, I started to wonder if she was deliberately trying to catch my eye. Eventually, Katie's long nights at work came to an end, and our lives returned to normal. One day, I decided to take a vacation day in the middle of the week to make up for some overtime I'd worked. That day happened to be trash day. Normally, I'd only help with the trash once in a blue moon, but since I was home, I decided to take care of it for once. Katie offered to do it, but I told her, "I've got the day off. I'll take care of it." She smiled and headed out the door for work. I awkwardly gathered up the garbage, grabbed the bags, and made my way to the elevator, arms full. As luck would have it, Tessa slipped into the elevator right before the doors closed. "Good morning," she said, all smiles. She was dressed casually, as usual, and we were the last ones to take out our trash for the day. The trash area was a mess clearly. Not everyone had followed the rules for separating their garbage. Tessa squatted down to start picking things up and looked up at me. "I wish people would be more considerate when they throw their trash away." I nodded. "Yeah, but I don't do this often enough to have much room to talk." As we cleaned up the mess together, I couldn't stop myself from noticing Tessa's body again. Her loose t-shirt left little to the imagination. It didn't look like she was wearing anything underneath, at least, not from what I could see. And from where I stood, I could see a lot. Was this on purpose? Lately, I'd been running into her so often, and now I started to wonder if she'd been waiting for me. These thoughts buzzed around in my head as we finished cleaning. My body was reacting again, and I didn't know how much longer I could hide it. Then Tessa said, almost apologetically, "Sorry for being dressed like this. I was in a rush." But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was deliberate. I half wished she would just admit it. Before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "Want to come by for a cup of coffee? It's my day off, and I never got to properly thank you for the other day." "Sure," she said, smiling. "I'd like that." I headed back to my place to clean up. Then, for some reason, I decided to wear just a t-shirt and shorts when I went over to Tessa's. I guess I figured that if I reacted again, she'd notice, and maybe that's what I wanted. When I rang her doorbell, I heard her voice through the intercom, "It's open, come in." I stepped inside and found her at the kitchen counter, making coffee. She placed 2 mugs on the table and sat across from me. Her t-shirt, once again, seemed to hide nothing underneath. The tension was thick in the air. As she handed me the coffee, she suddenly said, "So, you came over with that in mind, huh?" I almost dropped the cup. "What do you mean?" Tessa smiled knowingly and said, "Katie and I have become close. We've talked a lot over coffee recently, and not just about the usual stuff. We've talked about our marriages, including our sex lives." My heart skipped a beat. "What?" Tessa continued, "Katie mentioned that you two have been struggling a bit. Apparently, you're a bit too much for her to handle." She enjoys it, but sometimes it's painful and she feels bad about it. So, she made me an offer. What kind of offer? I asked, dreading the answer. She told me she'd rather I help you out than have you seek comfort elsewhere. She figured it was better if someone she trusted was involved. My mind was spinning. Tessa wasn't flirting with me because she was interested, she was doing it because my wife had asked her to. And that wasn't all. She also suggested that Mike and Katie might get along well, intimately, Tessa added with a smirk. Katie said Mike's a considerate lover. Was she suggesting we swap partners? My head was spinning. This wasn't what I had expected at all. Suddenly, I was transported back to my teenage years when I was just learning about masturbation. I remembered the time my mom walked in on me. I thought I'd be in trouble, but instead, she just said, "I guess you take after your father. Just be more careful when I'm around, okay? You really take after your dad. Impressive. Make sure you use it well with someone you care about someday." At that moment, her words and the way she looked at me had an effect. That memory had always given me a strange sense of confidence. But now, hearing that Katie had been talking about me like this, talking about how she was struggling to handle me, was a shock. All this time, she'd been trying to protect my feelings. Then Tessa told me, "I'd like to test you out myself, Greg." Apparently, she wasn't fully satisfied with Mike. And that's how this whole idea came up during her conversations with Katie. I finished my coffee, set the cup down, and looked at her. "Well then," I said, "I guess I'll let you take the lead." Before I could even process what was happening, she moved quickly. I had thought maybe we'd just flirt a little more, maybe exchange some teasing remarks. But she didn't waste any time. I wasn't expecting things to move so fast. Tessa leaned in, pressing her lips to mine, and I responded without hesitation. I told myself this wasn't cheating, it was all out in the open. Katie knew. She approved. That's what I kept repeating in my mind as I pulled Tessa closer. She wasn't wearing anything under her t-shirt, and the feeling of her body pressed against mine ignited something in me. We grabbed at each other passionately, our bodies moving together with a kind of urgency. This whole partner swapping thing seems to work out pretty well for everyone, doesn't it? I murmured between breaths. Tessa exhaled deeply. "Yeah, I think Katie and I will both be satisfied," she said with a smile. And with that, we fully gave in to the moment. We spent the rest of the afternoon wrapped up in each other, both of us clearly enjoying it. By the time it was over, it was already evening. As I got ready to leave, I told her we should do this again sometime, before heading back to my place. A little while later, Katie came home from work. I watched her carefully, wondering if she would say anything, but she didn't mention Tessa at all. That night, after Katie got out of the shower, I was more affectionate with her than usual. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was something else, but I wanted to show her I appreciated her. And I could tell she was feeling more excited than normal too. About a month went by, and during that time, I continued seeing Tessa here and there. I'm sure Tessa told Katie about it, but it was like we had this unspoken agreement. Katie never brought it up, and I didn't ask. But something changed in our marriage. Katie started becoming more assertive, more involved in our relationship, especially in the bedroom. It was almost like she was competing with Tessa, though she never said it outright. Yet, through all of this, I noticed something. Katie's effort to accommodate me, to make me feel desired and cared for, made me appreciate her even more. She didn't have to do any of this, but her willingness to be open and supportive filled me with a deeper satisfaction. Our marriage, though unconventional, now had an honesty and intimacy that made me feel truly happy. I felt lucky, not just because of Tessa, but because Katie knew me so well and put our relationship first. A couple of weeks ago, while Mike and I were having drinks, we ended up talking about the whole partner swapping situation. He knew about everything, of course. There were no secrets between the four of us at this point. Then the idea came up that the four of us should take a trip together over the next holiday weekend, a relaxing getaway at a hot springs resort.